What is up, everybody? My name is Richard Terrell. I go by Kirby Kid, and you are watching Design from Life, Hard Magic Made Easy, a panel at EGX Digital 2020, brought to you by Design Oriented. Welcome, everybody. The topic and title of today's talk is Designing from Life, Making Hard Magic Easy. We titled it that because we're going to jump into talk about creative arts, creative processes from the viewpoint of creating magic systems. And when we say magic systems, we're really talking about a lot of the creative worlds that authors build. There's all kinds of fictional authors, when we're talking about video games or movies or anything else, right? Creators make these worlds and they fill them with incredible detail and characters, but oftentimes the rules that govern this world, or what we often call magic systems, how they do the supernatural things, and what are the rules that the characters have to abide by, that's really what intrigues us a lot about these books. There's two different categories, right? Hard magic and soft magic. Soft magic is where the rules are very understated, very general, so you really don't get to sit down and piece things together. It's really just for decoration. It's for just the aesthetic part of it, just kind of getting the plot and the characters to move along. But on the opposite end, you have a lot of authors that create hard magic systems, and these have rules. And even when they're not explicitly stated in the story, there are consistencies to the way that the world works. Authors often have the rules written down in front of them so they can check their own ideas by the rules and make sure that everything comes out nice. We love fictional stories for these things, and these different things come in all shapes and sizes. But before we get any deeper into this, we're going to be joined by two of our design-oriented community members. All right, guys, welcome. We are going to have a little chat here about hard magic systems and how that relates to both creating fictional worlds and game design kind of things. So go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Mark.
I'm Crystal.
Oh, I'm Marcus. Hello.
The talk is about magic systems, and we kind of had this talk before, so that's kind of why we wanted to turn into a panel. And things get really interesting when we start getting a really clear idea of what these magic systems are and how they work. I know, Marcus, you came up with a bunch of examples. Can you tell us a few examples of magic systems in fiction that you might think fit the bill, right? That might be particularly interesting to study.
Anime in general, the shonen genre anime has a lot of hard magic systems, hard power-up systems, power-level systems. Stretches from everything from Naruto to Hunter x Hunter. Naruto in particular, its power, its magic is called chakra. It's a special energy that builds in the body. And I guess the most important thing to kind of realize about whatever you want to call your system is it's not so much what the initial rules are, especially for the animes, it's how you use those rules. So you can call them elemental affinities, right? Like fire beats wind, and then wind beats ground, and so on and so on. Or you just call it anything else, like, special beats enhance, and enhance beats blocking, right? You can call them anything, but what's important is the relationship between all those things on the pyramid, things on the pentagon, rings on the circle. The relationship is what matters. And how you express those relationships is what people cue into. They really don't care. You need your hard magic system to keep things straight in your mind, but what the viewers and the readers react to is the way how those rules interplay with common events, or between characters, or between common scenarios. So it allows the viewer to compare, contrast strengths, weaknesses, tactics, strategies, and whatnot.
Yeah.
So in Naruto in particular, you have that chakra, which is what they call magic. But with that chakra, they all do a base level series of techniques, climbing trees, enhanced running, enhanced strength, and things like that. But those particular traits are expressed differently across the characters. With those differences is how expresses how a battle may go in one direction versus another.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many details that people love picking apart in animes and manga and different stories like this, but there's also on the opposite end soft magic. And usually, as if you're an author, you have to pick one or the other. There's kind of an entire Star Wars debacle where people got mad at the explanation on how the Force works. Right? Everyone loved Star Wars for years and years and years, and all of a sudden somebody comes up and says, "Hey, they're metachlorians." If you go, "No, I don't need that. I don't want to think about that." That's a really interesting case in and of itself. Mark and Crystal, I know that you've read some interesting books and seen how certain anime movies have interpreted these books in terms of their magic systems, and how that works
Mm.
one way for films and other ways for written narratives. So if you have any details on that, let us know.
Yeah, so one of my favorite authors is Diana Wynne Jones. She wrote Howl's Moving Castle, which became a really popular anime movie by Miyazaki. Um, Her way of doing magic system is often very, I don't know, like understated. It's just kind of a natural part of the world. So Sophie, the main character, she does magic. She doesn't know she's doing it by just talking to things. So when she's doing hats, making hats, then she just talks to them like, "Oh, you're so beautiful," or "Oh, you'll have to marry money." And then suddenly the people who buy those hats, that's what happens to those people. They become really beautiful, or they marry someone who's very rich. And then, she just always is kind of chatting while she's doing her work. So one time she's mending one of Hal's cloaks that she broke, and she ripped apart. And she's mending it, and she's like, "Oh, you're just made to bring in girls." And she finds out later that she actually ended up enchanting it when she was sewing. She was literally sewing the magic into the seams. So it's really quite interesting. And then in the movie, they make it. I think they focus less on that and more just like, yeah, it's magic because it's magic. And I think they focus a little more on Hal's magic and Calcifer's magic more than Sophie's. But in the book, Sophie's is more focused on because she starts the book thinking that she's doomed to failure because she's the oldest of three children, which in fairy tales means she's going to fail. But she ends up being the most magical out of all of her sisters and ends up marrying Wizard Hal. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think is interesting about a lot of Diana Wynne Jones books too, is a lot of times, oftentimes it involves a character sort of discovering their magic, and at the beginning of the book, they often are performing magic by doing these basic everyday tasks, and they don't even realize it. So like you have Sophie talking to the hats or sewing magic into it. I know in Charmed Life, Cat often does magic without realizing it. I feel like that's a very common theme, is these people, they have this magical ability and it comes out just by doing their normal everyday actions, and they just don't even realize what's happening at first.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think shout outs to Harry Potter for being another fantastic example of what you might call hard magic. There's very specific classes that they take with very specific subjects. They have very specific histories. They have very specific ways of these things and ingredients and spells to interact and do magical things from there. And yet another example of Harry Potter doing magic without knowing it. Right? He was a parcel tongue, listening and talking to snakes, making a glass disappear, falling through, stuff like that. The classic "You're a wizard, Harry" is really a perfect line to encapsulate this idea that there are amazing things that can happen in the world, and you don't have to know about them explicitly to interact with them, to believe in them, to see them happen. And that's kind of why we love the discovery of magic systems a lot in fiction. My favorite superhero stories are almost always the origin stories. It's always that point where they're like, "What's happening? Spiderwebs shoot out of their arms," kind of a thing. And they are Spider-Man, even if they don't know it. And it's really interesting to see how that plays out. For our purposes, we are talking about what makes all these stories, what makes these systems and rules appealing. And as I was kind of hinting to there, it makes a lot of things more lifelike to us. I mean, we're surrounded in a complex world. There's rules everywhere. There's some we absolutely can't fight, like gravity and things like that. And there's others we like to bend, break, or even skirt behind the law and get away with weird things. And the life is full of that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about Harry Potter. Not that, they flick their wrists and crazy sparks come out, but that Harry Potter had to go to school and I was going to school, and I could find that very relatable. And Harry Potter had to take the OWL exams and I had to take my AP exams, and I found that very relatable. And it's kind of like what Marcus said. It's not this that you throw anything supernatural, otherworldly, or unconventional into your game plot story, whatever. It's that how does it make the characters, how do the characters interact because of those things, and how does it help you relate to the world? The through line here is rules. And when we're talking about hard magic systems, when we're talking about video games, when we're talking about rule-based systems, there's a certain quality here that we're going to drill down into to find out how it works a lot better. And then we're going to try to extrapolate that towards writing fiction, writing hard magic systems, and video games and beyond. A lot of us consume art all the time. We play a lot of games, we watch a lot of movies, we read a lot of books. But from the point of view of the creator, which is kind of where we're going to step into, we need to figure out how to go from zero to I have this amazing magic system / story that everybody loves and wants to imitate and play around with at Halloween. So when we're starting at zero, my advice to everyone always is draw from your real life experiences. I went through a lot of workshops and classes studying creative writing and just seeing how important it is to draw from your real life experiences. Whenever you do, for some reason, all the details are more rich. All the details make a lot more sense. All the details are more relatable, and there's a certain quality of believability and voice to it. Now, it's not magic, right? The thing that is unbelievable about it is that the world is complex, and simply having a first-hand experience gives you the way things smell, the way things feel, the way that your brain kind of remembers the event, the way that the event looks like from a first person from your point of view, and all these other super rich details that make up your actual memories, the actual way your brain works. So when you're going to turn around and make something out of the stuff in your brain, you go with the strongest, most detailed stuff up in your head, the ideas, and then you project it outward into the story. So it only makes sense that people can write better from things that actually happen to them. If you talk to someone who's like, hey, how was your day? And they tell you, you actually believe them, right? Because they just had a day at work, they come home, they tell you, and there's a lot of things they'll just say without even thinking that speaks to the believability and the consistency of the truth that they lived. So I always advise people, draw from life. You have to. And here's where the interesting part comes in. How do you draw from life when you're making something make-believe, right? Fictional, something that doesn't exist, something that's otherworldly or supernatural. And as we're zooming in on this concept, we're really understanding that rules are at the core of everything. Rules are actually what create believability. Rules are actually what create structure and form and consistency across many, many, many different actions. And that those rules are what we sort of, example by example, feel the edges of, and that's what we create, what basically creates our believability in fictional things. So to prove this, we've got something really interesting here. We're going to show you a clip of me making Kung Pao chicken, and we're going to walk the process from how do you go from any random real life experience to, wow, this is magical, fantastical, and completely interesting and believable. So we're going to walk you through the whole process, but it all starts with this. here are some of the ways that I spun up my own magic system out of my own personal experience making Kung Pao chicken, a hobby and an activity that I really love doing. So I think I broke down the magic system into three main parts. One is where you mix and make the sauce. Two is where you cut and marinate the chicken, and three is where you coat and cook in hot oil, and then you combine it all, right? So I'm like, well, what if this was an interesting like potion system or a magic-based system in that when you're concocting things, right? So I thought, okay, based on the chicken metaphor, the chicken experience, I translate that as every spell in my new magical system is made by combining two halves. Everything is always in a dyad, if you will, a binary. One half is always something that's dangerous and deadly, and the other half is always something that is life giving. And this means that whenever anyone goes out to create a potion, it always requires a certain level of skill, precision, and knowledge because you could kill yourself, right? Like you're dealing with dangerous stuff. It's kind of like how pretzels in real life are made with lye, and in order to do it in a professional way, you have to get food grade lye, and that substance is highly caustic because I think it's very, very base, not the opposite of acidic, and therefore it could burn you by touching you, and it's poisonous. But they still make pretzels, and pretzels are delicious. You're like, what's going on here? Exactly like that, but different. So because chicken, you handle chicken with care in the kitchen. It's a common thing. You do put it on a different cutting board. You make sure you have gloves or you wash your hands thoroughly. Salmonella is a big deal. That's where I came up with the whole like, you want the delicious food, but you got to deal with the poison. What are you gonna do? Kind of dichotomy. Then I came up with the idea that when mixing ingredients for any half, either the poison half or the non-poison half, the amount you mix is based on dynamic conditions. So this is not like a baking recipe where you follow the rules and you're like, I'm good. This is more like being a chef where you have to taste things as you go along. You have to be aware of the particular batch you have in the balance and season things accordingly. So I just thought like, okay, well, if you're making a potion and you got your dangerous thing and your not dangerous thing, life-giving thing, what if you were in a forest? Like, well, in a forest, maybe like, ooh, I'm in a balanced area of nature. I got more green here. Maybe I have to counterbalance that with a little more of the dangerous part. Like, maybe not. Like, just being aware of your surroundings. It's just kind of like something I wanted to bring to the magic system. It's also kind of like cooking if you're baking or cooking at a higher altitude, the different boiling point of water, because of the pressure, all these stupid things that are nearly invisible change how effective you can be when baking, cooking, or doing anything else. And the final idea that I drew from it was the magic potion won't work if the two halves aren't combined in a context of danger or duress. So I took the whole idea of like, well, you throw the chicken, the dangerous part, into the hot oil, and it's like, oil be dangerous. So what if when you're combining the actual ingredients, you're like, whoa, this is kind of dangerous if I get it wrong, explode or whatever. But then I thought, well, what instead of just like, the pot boiled up and you exploded, I thought, what if the context around you that you have to make your magic has to be life context, right? So it's not dangerous because you have a pot of boiling potion or oil. It's dangerous because you're making it, let's say, like in an alleyway, a dark alleyway at night. You're like, ooh, dangerous, right? But that actual real world danger helps, is an actual ingredient for making the potion actually work. And I thought that's really neat because it takes something that's really sort of personal, individualized, and intimate, like, ooh, I'm mixing potions, but it means your world context, your point of view, and the things that you're responding to make that potion is much bigger than just like this little pot in your hand. So yeah, I really love this idea of like just carrying little magic things around and basically observing the world around you to make something very magical and very small in a tiny little package. I mean, the idea can go one way or another. It's just a brainstorming idea, but certainly when you do this on a regular basis, when you are thorough and specific with your design, when you share with the community like we have here at Design Oriented, when you do the right stuff, you get much, much better, much faster, much more confident in producing. You will never feel like your idea is like your one special idea, and if you get it wrong, you're never going to be a creative type. Creativity is a discipline. You practice it every day, you work at it every day, and it comes naturally to you every day. So that's mainly the whole point of this talk. All right. So you saw the whole thing from start to finish. I hope it looks delicious to you. I had a lot of fun making it. I love making food. I love cooking. And a lot of what I love in real life, a lot of those first-hand experiences is what I'm drawing on to try to create a magic system from this crazy cooking experience. But the way we do that is in 4 very simple, I hope, steps. So the first step, always work from what you know, even if you are trying to create something that doesn't exist. That's kind of where we're starting this whole exercise. You need to take your firsthand experiences. Keeping a journal helps. Having a good memory helps. Keeping a journal actually helps you have a good memory. Those things kind of go hand in hand. But making sure that you start with you first is always a really good way to start. Step number two, the structure of real experiences from real life can be translated. It's the structure that makes things feel real, relatable, complex, and rich. We kind of went over that. Uh, so when you're working with an example from real life, this is step number three. You first need to recognize that the rules and structures exist in real life things that you've already done. So you got to ask yourself, what are the rules? What was I subconsciously abiding by? Like, what are the things I was consciously being aware of? Those are all important. If you want to make a magic system about doing something, it's also important to draw your example from doing something, right? So you don't say, I want to make a magic system where people can shoot, magic and fight crime and fight monsters, but I'm going to compare that to my real life experience of me being bored in this chair. Like, that's not a good experience. That's not a good comparison. Doing something matches with doing something. Feeling something can match with feeling something, and you're looking for parallels. The whole exercise that we're outlining here is about drawing connections between things. We're looking for parallels, we're looking for connections, we're looking for points of commonality. So in this step three, if you match up the content, the subject matter, and then you kind of really detail for yourself what it is that you're doing. In this case with the Kung Pao chicken, going step by step, manipulating ingredients, and then building a dish that I can eat. But then from there, you have to extract the ideas and the concepts behind the steps, right? Like, why am I doing this? Why couldn't I do this? Why is it important to rinse the chicken? Why is it important to do this step before this step? And if you have experience doing the thing, and more that you draw from your best experiences, you'll have an answer. Well, we only do this because of this, obviously. You don't want to do that because it's salmonella and you'll die, obviously. You always chill this first because otherwise there's lumps, obviously. And to you it's obvious, but even talking out loud or writing those things down will build and build and build a series of interconnected rules, right? It's giving you this really complex framework to work off of. And after you do that, you can ask yourself how, right? Like, yeah, you know that you're making this. Yeah, you know why you should do this, but then what's the exact way that you do it, right? There are plenty of different ways to cut an onion. There are good ways, there are dangerous ways, there are fancy ways, there are fancy devices like a slap chop. How you do it is that last level of specificity, and you draw on your own personal experiences. You don't have to be a chef, you don't have to be a professional, you don't have to be even good at a thing to have a really rich and detailed way of explaining how you do it. And it's all about you. Creative arts expression is all about you expressing it outward. So the fourth and final thing that I want to say about this interesting process is this process of taking something from real life and converting it to something creative, is that once you have broken everything down into the individual steps, the what's, the hows, the whys, and you have the concepts behind it, right? Then you can change just a single element, right? You can just change one element in the entire thing, or maybe like change the type of element. Like, instead of food, you're using rocks, or instead of food, you're using like plants, like real life living plants. You can change it to whatever you want. But when you do that, it gives you the ability to build the structure back up, and you're piggybacking off of the structure that already exists in your mind and the one that you've already detailed. So that's the step-by-step in a nutshell, and we're going to demonstrate it in 3 different examples. So I think Mark and Crystal, we went over this exercise with you, Mark, before, and I think you drew your inspiration from what exactly?
From walking my dog. In particular, here he is. In particular, sort of getting ready to walk him was a lot of it. When you think about the things you do every day, oftentimes you don't think about all the steps involved, but when you start to break it down, it's like, oh yeah, I do go through a very specific approach to getting ready for these things. First of all, usually I try to find the right time of day to take him out. We live in an apartment, we don't have a yard. So I have to take him outside a few times a day so that he can use the bathroom. I usually hello, Dexter. I usually try to plan ahead of time. There are times of the day when I need to leave to go shopping or whatever else. So I usually try to take him out a little while ahead of that time, so that once we come, there'll be time for him to settle down a little bit after we come back inside. Sort of the routine I go through is I start to like get things together. Like I put things in my pockets, I put my keys in my pockets, put my socks on. I'm starting to get ready. Recently it's been hot, so I usually feed him a little bit of food before I take him out. That way his stomach doesn't get upset in the heat. I go over to the front. Usually he doesn't come right away because he's not certain if he's coming or if I'm just leaving by myself. So then I call to him like, Dexter, come on. I call to him. I use a specific tone of voice to talk to him to get his attention. Hello. And then in my case, usually at that point, I realize that I forgot something. And so then I'm like, oh, sorry, Dexter, I need to go grab my keys. Or I need to go grab whatever this is. And he realizes that. And so he usually like waits, is like, is it really time to come? And then I take him outside. I carry him down the stairs because dachshunds potentially have lots of back problems. So I don't want him to using the stairs too much. As I walk him along the streets in Japan are fairly narrow, in our city in particular, and so I have to be careful. I keep myself between him and traffic because he's very small. Cars wouldn't be able to see him very well. Then I usually he doesn't like when I make him change direction, so I usually try to go in some kind of a loop to come back around to our apartment. And so those are just some of the basic details about what goes on when I walk in. Can you think of anything else in particular?
No. What? No.
So yeah, that's great. You can really tell that you are drawing from your own experience. There's a lot of little things that I would have never thought about. I don't have a dog. I used to have some cats, and it's a completely different story about the routines dealing and living with cats. So yeah, that specificity is exactly what we're looking for. And I believe this is where all of your most compelling and creative translations and comparisons will come from. So we did exactly that. We walked through the 4 steps with Mark, and we ended up with a magic system. The details are right here. We're going to try to convert the experience of preparing to walk a dog and walking a dog into a magic system. So go ahead, Mark, and explain what you came up with.
So the basic idea is, as I'm preparing to walk Dexter, I'm sort of getting specific things ready, and then I have to sort of call him over to me and get him on his leash to prepare. So we talked about turning that into summoning like an otherworldly creature, summoning a magical creature. And that can be any kind of creature. In this case, we're taking our dog out of the equation and replacing him with something else. So then we change a few things along the way. Like I think we talked about the first animal that came to my mind. We have a lot of Seahawks in our city. We live near the ocean. And so it's like, okay, we summon a hawk. And so it's like, okay, how does that change things? When you're summoning a hawk, you still need to sort of go through in the magic system. You go through, you prepare like the ritual. You go through, you prepare whatever like objects you'll need. Like, oh, for a hawk, maybe you'll need something else. We talked about clipping its wings so it couldn't get away. And then maybe you'd probably want like one of the gauntlets that the people who work with the birds have.
Falconeers, I think.
Falconeers, yeah.
I think it's point for point, too. You mentioned putting things in your pocket, and you're like, well, to summon the creature, you have to put specific objects in your pocket. Something that beckons the bird creature. That's something that does this and that. Like, that's part of the magic summoning. Something that's really easy for games to do, right? You have this in your inventory, shove it into your summoning pockets or whatever, and then that's a part of the process. Then there's the preparation of leaving your apartment we talked a little bit about, where once you summon the creature, it's in your apartment, and then you have to do certain things in order to calm it down, to let it know that you're about to go out. You mentioned something about putting it on a leash in particular, so that when you lead it out, it just doesn't fly away or do whatever else, right? It's just like walking your dog. And then we said, like, you don't even have to have a battle system in this particular fiction, but we thought just the idea of summoning this creature causes all kinds of effects on the world around you, right? So once the creature is in your home, almost like House Moving Castle, where the room started to transform when he got all depressed and it just turned into like slime down the sides. Like, so like effects start happening once you start getting this ritual going. We talked about how in order to complete this summon or whatever, you have to take the creature out of the house, protect it from danger, like avoid certain things, and then make it into an entire summoning loop, because you mentioned going in a circle all the way back to your home, and then the spell is complete, right? And just making those, we changed almost nothing. It's just
Yeah,
adding a
yeah.
magical creature in and then doing a lot of the same things, just making it magic themed. And all of a sudden, you have this really cool idea of summoning creatures from the other world and binding them to this world by doing, various steps that video games can really easily translate. Yeah, characters walking around, moving things, inventories, all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
Mm.
when we got to that point, it's just really exciting because I've never seen a game like that. I've never seen anyone do anything like that really, and that's half the point.
Yeah.
You have such rich experiences in your own life, even if they don't seem special, even if they seem routine or mundane. Drawing from those experiences is what is interesting because in a really weird way, if you
Mhm.
explain to somebody your boring day, they think it's interesting. It's different from them,
Mhm.
and just comparing your life to their life is a point of interest. So even if you think your rituals routine and mundane or ordinary, it's not to somebody else. And adding that tiny creative twist just skyrockets, right? Like people are super interested. I'm interested right now in listening to your story, and I've already heard it twice. That kind of a thing. So yeah, any
Yeah,
more
it's true.
details that you might want to add?
As we're out walking our dog, like it does have an effect on the world around us. I have to pay attention to other people since the streets are narrow. Like if someone's coming, sometimes in order not to inconvenience us, they'll like cross the street and go on the other side. Or if they have a dog, I sort of have to follow their lead. I sort of watch how they're reacting. Like if they're looking at our dog and smiling, then it's like, oh, they're probably open. And then we walk up and let our dogs meet each other and sniff each other and interact, and we talk about how the other person's dog is cute and ask how old the other dog is, things like that. But if the person looks nervous, sometimes they'll just move their dog to the other side of the street, or sometimes they just stop their dog right there and like wait, and then I move around and avoid it because clearly they're not trusting their dog to be able to socialize well. And so those are just yeah, there's a lot of details
Yeah,
you
that's
can
super cool.
go into. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Cool. So that magic system is about taking the experience of walking your dog, walking anyone's dog, but in particular walking Mark and Crystal's dog and turning that into a very
Hmm.
specific, unique kind of magic system.
Hmm.
Hey, Daxter. So the next one we got up is Marcus. So when we were talking about a magic system for you, some of the experiences you were drawing from is experience working for UPS and loading trucks, all the packages that come through the mail, and they have to be loaded a specific way. They have to be loaded with a specific kind of accuracy, speed. There are safety regulations for loading packages of above X amount of pounds. They call that what, team lift or whatever. There's all these kinds of things that both keep the employees safe and the whole chain running smoothly. So you were drawing all your details, your particulars around the experience of being a single person in that kind of context. So go ahead and show us what you got.
At UPS, you have your trucks, and then of course specific boxes go in each truck. So each truck's going to be represented by a suit, diamond, spade, heart, clubs, right? And so the boxes come down the belt at random orders, right? So you can have club, heart, spade,
And we can only see
diamond.
the four cards in a row too.
Okay,
Okay.
so everything comes down the belt randomly. So of course you want to match uh, suits so you can deliver them to the trucks easier. So depending on the volume and depending on the rate, right, this becomes harder and harder. So the easiest, right, you're like, oh, if this is right next to this and the truck is near you, you put it into the truck. Choop. But right, if you match them over here and the truck is over here, you're like, oh, I have to go across these other two suits before I get to the truck. Does the truck these two suits go to ahead of me or the truck's behind me? If they're behind me, you're like, oh, well, I'm going back. I might as well pick up these two cards or these two boxes. So like, okay. But then when they're in your hand, you're like, oh, I got to remember that the first truck, two boxes are the first two boxes I have, right? And then below that is the second truck, and below that, the third truck. So you have to keep all that in your head while you're walking back and forth across the belt. Speed, box weight, box size, all determines if you can even pick it up correctly. So if you have a heavy box, like, oh, I can only pick up this one spade. And then when you pick up that one spade, all the other boxes are going to go down the belt. You're like, well, got to take this and bring it all the way back down to the belt. If that takes up too much time, you know what? We're just going to let it go. Who cares? Woo! So basically, it's just UPS is a bunch of sequencing with a neat spatial dynamic and a neat weight dynamic.
Yeah.
And of course, the physicality of walking back and forth between the trucks is always going to be a factor.
Cool.
That's pretty much how the basis of the UPS work magic system.
Yeah, so you've told me a lot about your experiences at work, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But even when you explain it like that, I think instantly, oh, puzzle game, right? Action puzzle game, sorting things, figuring out sequencing. That's what puzzle games thrive on. Not only am I a huge fan of Aeroporter, which is a game that's very similar. You're sorting packages in an airport, and you're just trying to line up the colors and get the colors in the right airports, and ton of fun. Just mimicking that real life experience, you get a lot of dynamics and details that you may not ever have thought about otherwise. And when we were talking about converting this into a magic system, we're like, okay, what if this was like a spell casting system, right? And when you are countering a spell from your opponent, their spells, their words coming in are like the boxes, right? And you can either choose to like group them together, sequence them, and spit the words back at them in a certain order, or you can clump them up. And the rules that would govern which words you can clump up, which words that you probably should let go past you and all that would be exactly how you described it, just based on simple things like whether they match, whether they're the weight. Like you could just do a simple thing like rhyme is matching and weight is word linked, and all of a sudden you got a really complex verbal based magic spell system with interplay too. The interplay between you, the belt, and the trucks can just be like, well, one's representative of one spellcaster and one's representative of the spell counterer. Or you can make a magic system where there are, you know how golf has like caddies and players, right? Or in other things you have like a sniper and a spotter, or all kinds of things like teaming up for your casting would be kind of a neat thing to introduce, right? Like every spellcaster has a scribe and a caster, right? And it's their job to work together. And then one guy should spit in rhymes, right? Like just out of his mouth. And the other guy has to sort them out and organize them. Again, who knows? But that's really cool. And you got a lot of specific experiences, rules, and dynamics that are already there. And it's just fun to find what little change you can make in order to make the whole thing interesting. So yeah, that's the whole point, right? And it's endless, because if you just change it from spellcasting to like bricklaying or whatever, then you've got yourself a weird system for making like magical buildings or buildings that have certain kind of character or integrity. You just go wild, right? But the structure, the rules, and how that affects decision making and whatever, all that's already built in. Going from life, I swear, is so much easier, it's so much better. Designing video games in general is the process of finding solutions to reach defined goals while being aware of the rules and limitations of whatever medium you're working with. That's universal across anything you're trying to design. And even though we created hard magic systems, this approach of studying something, breaking things down, identifying a target, and then changing the specific elements to reach that target can be applied to anything that you want to design, even video games, right? We talked about magic systems, but really, like we said with Marcus's example, that could be a puzzle game, that could be a puzzle system, a battle system, anything. Systems are collections of rules, if you haven't picked up on that yet, and all the ways that you can mix and match and understand the rules will only give you more and more flexibility as a designer. But if you want to find out more about the kinds of things we think and the kinds of things we do, we encourage you to join us at Design Oriented. It's our community. But until next time, guys, we're all saying bye.
See ya.
Bye.